Hey everyone, welcome to Adobe Live at Adobe Symposium 2019. We're here on day 2 and we have Ayres with us.
Hello.
So Carly did her keynote yesterday. So if you missed it, you can go back and have a look. But we're going to be having a little chat around some of the things that you talked about in that, which is really exciting. How are you feeling now?
Relieved.
Yes.
I always feel very relieved after I'm done with the talk.
How long does it take to kind of like prepare something like that?
It depends. I mean, for this one, I knew some of the projects are projects that I've talked about publicly before, so there's a bit of a narrative there, but always I think like you want to create something that's unique for like a new audience and make something special, and especially leading up, I got here on Sunday, so I had plenty of time to
good window, yeah.
freak out and practice twice a day, every day, so it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those that may have missed the talk, can you give you a little bit of a recap on maybe like who you are, what you do?
Yes.
So maybe the key points in the talk?
Yeah. So I'm Carly. Up until a few months ago, I was a partner at a design studio in New York called Hallraff. We ran it for the last 3 years. I had 3 other partners, Andrew, Nikki, and Pedro. And we did a lot of interactive work. I mean, for most of my career, I've worked as a writer, using a lot of like language and words as tools to engage people in new and interesting ways. And with the studio, we did that with interactive websites and marketing and brands and all the ways that design tends to manifest these days. So I talked about some of the guiding principles of the studio and the guiding principles of my own practice and how that showed up in the different work that we did.
Yeah, cool. I found it fascinating. Like, I think I've even since you did your first website, the one that's like really interactive, I remember looking at that and I remember thinking, this is really cool. I want to see what these guys do. And I think following along has been really awesome. And you've always been, I mean, this is something I've got here to talk about, but maybe we can start there. The transparency has been like really radical and really cool to watch. Like, how did you kind of go about incorporating that into your process?
Yeah, so all of us met working together at Google's Creative Lab in New York. And from the moment we met and started to collaborate on different projects, like we knew that eventually we wanted to start a studio. And there just weren't that many resources out there. Like when we were looking for like, what does it take? Or even talking to other people who had started design studios, it was really difficult to find information about what it was actually like. And it seemed like the only answer was to do it. But in doing so, we wanted to ideally leave some resources along the way of the things that we learned. So I think it was difficult. We had very ambitious hopes in the beginning. We're like, we're going to share every project we get and how much we get paid for it and like all that stuff. But very quickly you realize like, oh, like there's so many other people involved. Like you have freelancers, you have clients. Clients don't tend to really like when you're publishing your contracts online and sharing how much money you're making and all that kind of behind the scenes stuff. So very quickly we're like, all right, well, like what can we do? And so we tried to find different ways, like be that sharing a pie chart of where our clients came from or our own profit and loss statement at different design conferences we spoke at, like trying to figure out what those outputs could be.
Yeah, really cool. I think something I've been thinking about is like every time I go into my shared with me drive on Google, I see your name. And it was funny because like when we were talking about like who wants to like interview you, I was like, I would really love to because like I've got all your resources from when you wrapped up, which is really cool that you shared that.
It's funny. So my personal website has also been a Google Doc since like 2015. And people will message me and they're like, you're still in my drive. Like you're just like constantly in that list of things because it's like a shared document. But it's funny to see how, the legacy of digital documents.
Well, that kind of like transitions nicely into something I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, which is that idea of, I think you talked about it yesterday, everything being interactive. And particularly, like, I love the word that you used, which was like participatory design. It's very cool. Maybe you can expand a bit on that and how that came into your work.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so much of it was like, if you really want to like build it up, I guess you could say it's like an ethos and this like the principles. But at the end of the day, it was that living as like a digital human and spending time on the internet, you'd get like brands interrupting your Twitter conversations or saying "bae," and there's so many examples of just like bad engagement almost, or like these kind of like bad interactions that you stumble upon, and
forced interactions.
Yeah, this
even?
forced or like ads that get like, I mean, pop-ups is like the quintessential example, but you want to engage people, you want to get in front of people, but people don't want to be interrupted. They're tired of brands interrupting their conversation. So like, how can you do it in a way that actually is nice and you're inviting someone to be a part of a conversation rather than like interrupting their conversation or shoving a conversation on top of them. It's like going to a bar and like some dude comes up and just starts talking to you and just like won't shut up and like won't go away. I feel like that's how a lot of those experiences feel.
The real world equivalent of pop-ups.
So
yeah,
it's like, how can you make something that's like fun and like usually it has like an element of play. Ideally, someone gets something out of it. There's like value there. You've created a game or a toy or a resource, and like that's your point of engagement.
When you started Horaf, did you know that that was going to be something that you wanted to have in each of the projects you were doing?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I think it was like something that it was funny, especially even 4 people coming together. For the first year, it was 3 of us, and then Pedro joined us in the second year. But it was interesting to have like friends and people that we had collaborated with previously come up and be like, oh, like I could totally see, like that's such a Horaf project. And be like, really? Like what is that? Especially because everyone has their own experiences and their own personality, and like how does that all come together? I think it was those shared values that we wrote together at the beginning of the studio, like all the things we believed in and the things we didn't want to lose sight of in starting a company together, that those things ended up becoming very clear in the work that we did.
Maybe for anyone who missed that, do you mind, I guess, telling us a few of what those values were?
Ooh, number 1, it just says concept. It's like always start with concept. Concept should be number 1. I think we had all worked on a lot of projects where you get to the end, you're like, what is this about anyways? Like, this has no meaning. Some of them are just like very simple. It's like always to be open, to like keep an open mind, to listen, to be honest and transparent. And especially to never do something just because that's the way it's been done before. We used to always go back and forth and be like, when they zig, we insert something random here, like roll on the floor or run away. We don't even zag. We just like do something totally unexpected. Just to like keep it interesting and ideally not fall into these traps and tropes that you learn over time just from being in certain work environments or working in a certain space.
I'm curious about going back a little bit in terms of how you got started in writing. Love to know a bit more about your background.
My background, so I went to art school. I studied industrial design.
Oh, really?
So I did a lot of welding and woodworking.
Useful tools and...
It's useful now, like as I'm like rewiring the lights in my apartment, or if I have to do any electric stuff. Super sick. Sometimes it shows up in the work itself, but not as much. But after I graduated, I did take some graphic design classes while I was in school, and I also took ceramics classes. I took so many classes outside of industrial design that was actually difficult for me to graduate. But when I did finally graduate, I joined Creative Mornings.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So that was like my first, that was like my internship after my junior year, and then I joined full-time after I graduated. And I was the second employee, so it was a small team.
Yep.
And you get to wear a lot of hats when you work on a small team.
Absolutely.
As many are probably familiar. And it was like through that I ended up doing a lot of writing. And I'd always been writing for different design blogs and publications, like editorial articles about like covering like student gallery shows and like all that stuff. And that kind of snowballed and became much more of like what I enjoyed doing. Like, as you might be able to tell, I like to talk and I like to meet people and I like to like write things. And so that ended up becoming just like more of what I wanted to do. And so after Creative Mornings, I ended up working at like a small brand studio, hopped around, did some freelancing, did some chatbot personalities, and then ended up at the Creative Lab where I met my partner.
Yeah, cool. I think like, it's just something that I don't see the conversation happening a lot around is like writing in design. And I've been really lucky to kind of go through a lot of different places and work with creative directors who feel that there's a huge importance with writing, but it just doesn't seem to touch a lot of people. And I think, I'm curious like how you think, how we can make that more part of how people design and incorporate it so that we're not just like, going straight into the programs, but we're thinking like, what's that communication element?
Yeah, Mike touched upon that in his talk a little bit too yesterday. It's this idea that language is so important, and sometimes that's the place where a lot of projects can even start, be that a sentence or a one-liner or just like the concept or a word. I think writing is so important. I think a lot of the great designers I know are people who are thinking about their work. They're designing things, but then they're also, be that if you write for yourself even, like I don't think you need to have like a public-facing blog, but just to create a practice where you're reflecting on why you're doing what you're doing, and like sometimes having that not be visual is super important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had another thought there, but it kind of floated away.
All right, we can maybe grab back onto it. It'll float back.
It'll float back. No, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think having a writing practice is really important. And design is about communication. Like at the end of the day,
absolutely.
ideally, like you're trying to communicate an idea. And I think too often designers are like, oh, like I do the visual stuff, but like the word stuff, like all that stuff I don't care about. And it's like, I don't know. Like you have to be able to communicate your ideas, even inside like a larger organization. Like half the challenge is like making a deck that you can present to like your boss so that they can take it to your boss's boss. And like that is like how money gets spent to make ideas, and if you don't have those tools, then you're operating at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always found it funny because like my course that I did was called Visual Communications, and like it's such a crucial. It's like visual communications, and using language is such a crucial part. But even like narratives, like when you're putting together something like to present, it's like I think people don't have that kind of appreciation of words that they should when it comes to design.
Yeah, it's everything.
Yeah. Something I love the way you talked about this was kind of demystifying the design process, but also removing that word magic around design. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yes. It's something I feel very strongly about, so I have to center myself. But I do feel like design gets treated as this like magical thing. We use terms like unicorn and I don't know, like design wizard or all that stuff. I just feel like until we can get to a place where like my parents can go to a dinner party and explain to someone what I do.
Yeah, my parents
can't
do that.
They're like, she works at Google. Like until they can do that, then like we are at a disadvantage from like so many other industries where people are like, oh yeah, I know what a writer does. I know what a developer does. Like on certain levels, like people have a better understanding of what so many other careers entail, and we need to get better. I mean, talk about language, like explaining what it is that we do, but also not just kind of putting it in a box and being like, magic, like look what I made. It's so beautiful. I just like whipped this up.
Yeah,
and I think when it looks like it's something that you can just like whip out of a box or something, then it makes it very difficult to advocate and negotiate for its value. Like how many hours does it take to make a good logo? When there's sites like Fiverr or Tasker, like all these other like places where you can go and get design for relatively cheap, which I think is great. Like what sets that apart from like me spending like 4 months working on your brand?
Yeah.
Like I need to be able to measure that. And magic just doesn't do it justice.
So where do we start?
That's a good question. I guess with words, talking about what it is that we do, talking about it in a clear way, talking to people who are not in our industry, perhaps. I think that more of that needs to happen. I took like a writing course a few weeks ago, and the professor, I was like, well, I just feel like there's so much out there, so much design writing, like, where would I even fit into all this? And she's like, Carly, there are like scientific journals. There are places that are publishing and giving awards for great science writing. Like, none of that stuff exists for design yet. Like, we are so early as a profession. Like, there's no infrastructure. There are no, like, we have awards that you, like, pay to participate in and, like, some sort of, like, existing structures that are, like, promoted from within, but, like, who are the people who are, like, judging and, like, supporting this industry so it can, like, grow and mature into whatever it needs to be next?
It's quite, like, navel-gazing at times as well. Like, you don't have other people coming rarely from the outside being like, oh, I'm just going to reference this work in my other practice or whatever that is. So, yeah, I think that's breaking that
more
apart.
Cross-pollination. We'd always talk about it. It's like being a famous dentist. It's like, no, like, you speak at a conference and then you like tell your parents about it, or you like, I don't know, you see your neighbor or something. It's, no one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares. But like, how can we actually break down those walls and like show other people like what the power of design is? I loved that in Cheese Talk, how she told her mom to take a service design class, and her mother being a nurse took that back to her own work. And I think there needs to be more of that. Like there needs to be more people understanding like, okay, like if design's so valuable, what can it do for me? And then like them being able to like learn and ideally take that back into their own work.
And it goes the other way, right? I think you kind of talked about this yesterday about, I think this is something like the best designers are ones who don't only care about design.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that for me was like a really powerful statement because I think, do you want to elaborate a bit more on it?
Yeah, that was like at the end of the talk where I'm like, all right, and here's like 5 more things I don't have time to talk about, but like I really believe in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the best designers are the ones who don't only care about design. They're people who are curious. I mean, I think that's where good ideas come from, especially we're in such like a time right now where there's all these digital social media networks and platforms where you're seeing other people's work, and then the work starts to look the same, and then due to other restrictions, like every website, like a lot of stuff is just getting super homogenized. And to make things that are different or arrive at solutions that are different than the way things have been done before, like you need to be expanding what your inputs are. And even to the point, like in the studio, I remember I tried to start a book club once. I was like, we should all read the same book. And Andrew was like, no, like we should not read the same books. We should all read different books and then talk about them. And I was like, all right.
That's an interesting point.
But it was, I was like, touche, like, so we're not like just like group thinking everything, which is inevitable when you spend like 8 hours a day with the same people. Like you just kind of like grow into each other. But yeah, so I think a big part of that, it came from that, like that conversation with Andrew, but just like how can we diversify our inputs and just like go out into the world and learn things that eventually it all comes back around.
Do you think that kind of factors into that whole specialist versus generalist debate?
I used to describe myself as a specialized generalist, generally specializing in, and then I would list like 40 things.
That's so good.
It's perfect, except people need, I talk about boxes a lot, but people do need a box to put you in.
Yep.
They're like, all right, what do I do with that? What do I hire you to do? And you're like, any of those 40 things. And I'm like, well, you can't be good at all of them. So you do kind of, even if your like one-liner is like, like I usually work with like words and interaction. And people are like, okay, at least I can like, I have like a framework to think of like what you do. Because you can't put that heavy lifting on everyone else. But at the same time, I feel like I've always been a generalist just because, I mean, the world is constantly changing. Like the work that I do now, I couldn't have done when I graduated for sure. So the only way to keep being able to evolve and move with that to me has always been like expand as much as possible. Like, what is it, like T-shaped person? Like go deep on like a few different things and then be able to build off that so that I can stay flexible and like take on whatever project comes my way. But specializing, I've never been good at being a specialist, but I think I lack the attention span.
I'm the same. And I think like the more I've absorbed from the whole debate, like I'm trying to just take it in and not really make a call, but I definitely feel like there's something between, you know, being a generalist, but being able to evolve.
Yes.
And like you can obviously evolve in, I think being a specialist, but I think you've just got more room to grow in different directions and expand. And for me, that interests me a lot. Like I think other people love what they do and they can stick with it and great for them. But I think, if you can expand and make it work, that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, even just being able to identify like the spaces you're interested in and then finding out like, okay, what are the skills I need to like keep sharp in this space? Because I mean, the tools are always changing. Like everything is the way we interact with the internet. Like, I don't know, it's like people talk to their phones all the time in like a way that would have felt like kind of weird a few years ago. And like, I don't know, I talk to devices in my home and all this stuff that it feels like it's out of a sci-fi movie. So like, how knowing that like the formats are always going to be changing, how can you stay interested in certain spaces, but make sure that your skill set can evolve so that you can do work in any space?
Yeah, I was into a podcast recently about like kind of future-proofing, like digital artists thinking about, will my art actually be accessible in 100 years and what device will it be on? And I was thinking that's super interesting. Like I don't think that much as a designer about those things, but it should factor in. Like we should be thinking about like how people are going to experience this and will it live or will it not and how's it going to move?
It's even funny to hear, what is it, like CDs erased after like 20 years or something? Yeah. Like I remember just like saving everything to like these piles of CDs. I must have been like high school or it must have been college. And I was like, this will work. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, none of that stuff will be here in 20
Relevant.
years.
Something else I wanted to touch on quickly was you talked about no work being precious.
Oh,
which
so
I really
hard.
loved. It was great. I think is like I've worked across a lot of disciplines, but I've also recently been doing a lot of stuff in education. And I think talking to designers who are starting out and trying to tell them that it's okay, you don't have to be precious about something, is really important.
There's definitely like many caveats, I'm sure, to that, where it's like there's a whole ethos, especially in Silicon Valley, about like move fast and break things. And I think that's super dangerous. And especially when you're creating tools or like spaces for people that they rely on, defibrillators, like things that are like somewhat precious and like do involve like be precious with those things. But there's so much of our work is not precious, especially as designers, like, and the ability to be able to like let something go and move on, like that's what makes space for like the next thing or the next great idea. And I just like the number of times on a project where I've even just like I just like refuse. I'm like, this is it. This was the idea, and I like can't get over it, and therefore like eventually someone has to like pry it from like my cold dead hands and be like, all right, like what if it's a square instead? And you're like, okay, like I guess it could be a square, and then it's so much better because of that. I think you just have to like, and especially with critique culture too. Like I think like you have to get used to like taking feedback and consider feedback to be a gift, and then be willing to like abandon whatever the precious little thing that you made and like move on to the next. But yeah, nothing work is precious for sure.
Was there like a turning point or like a project that kind of pushed you over the edge to like realize that that's something you need to take forward?
I think working on teams.
Yeah.
I think so much of like a lot of my career I've freelanced, and a lot of that time you're an island. You know, you spend a lot of time by yourself sometimes. And I think that process, you like get really entrenched in your ways and your belief systems, and you really believe that your way is the right way.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're put on a team again. You're like, oh wait, we're better when we work together. Everyone else also has valuable input and different perspectives, and they bring something to the table that I don't, and that stuff makes the work so much better. So I think with that comes a lot of trust, which is super hard. But yeah, you have to trust that other people have also, well, everything, I think one of the things on that piece of paper was also assume best intentions.
Yeah,
because like sometimes you'd get feedback and you'd be like, it's because they hate me.
Yeah.
They must hate me. Everyone hates me. And it's like, no, like, I just want to make the work better.
Yeah.
So
don't take it too personally. Yeah. Cool. We're just about out of time, but I wanted to wrap up and ask, what's next for you?
Well, I have a few more days in Sydney, so I'm going to fill them with all sorts of things. But then I don't know. Yeah, doing some freelancing work again.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to do nothing. I'm not very good at it.
Yeah.
At being my specialized generalist, specialist.
Yeah.
I'm reading the book How to Do Nothing, and I'm still not doing nothing. So I'm hoping maybe in the next 2 days I'll really crack that nut. And maybe I'll sit still and stare at the harbor for like an hour.
It's a pretty good way to pass time. It's not that bad. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Enjoy the rest of your time in Sydney and here at Symposium.
Yeah.
It's be good.
Glad to be here.
All right, stick around. We've got plenty more coming up today, and we'll be back soon.